Hello and welcome to the ArtistWorks Live Dispatch from Home. I'm Marcus Luscombe, the Director of Production here at ArtistWorks. If you're just joining us for the first time today, ArtistWorks is an online music instruction company, and we work with 37 world-renowned musicians who recorded entire video curriculums that you can learn with online with us. And you can also interact directly with them via video exchange and get feedback on your playing as you learn. Now, on today's show, we're going to be getting into some really interesting stuff. We're going to be exploring the very many styles of blues and the origins of some of the most iconic sounds that have helped shape Western music that came out of it. It's a massive topic, so we're probably just going to scratch the surface, but we're in really great hands today with Keith Wyatt, who teaches blues guitar at ArtistWorks. And we also have an ArtistWorks podcast series, and our newest episode comes out today with Keith diving further into this topic. And let me bring on Keith now.
Howdy, folks.
Hi, Keith. Welcome.
Well, it's good to be here, and one of my favorite topics. I think about this stuff, talk about it all the time.
Awesome. Well, as you know, you've done a few of these shows before, and we always like to kick these off with some music. Once we get started, for everyone watching, we'd like to encourage you to join the conversation. Check in, drop a comment, let us know where you're watching from, and if you have any questions, we'll try to get to those as we go. So feel free to participate. So, all right, Keith.
Mercy, mercy, mercy. People's key of E.
Woo.
Mercy,
Right.
mercy, mercy.
Beautiful.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if I call it that, but there it is.
Awesome. Well, would you like to bring in our guests here?
If we have to, let's do it. You going to just put them all up there, or should I introduce them one at a time?
Let's bring them in one at a time so we can say hi to them as they come on.
Okay. Well, first, I gotta bring up my neighbor. Lives right over the hill, and he is one of the greatest contemporary jazz guitar players on the face of the planet right now. And I have known him for coming up on 4 decades, I think. I'll have to ask him specifically. But he's an inspiration to all of you. I'm sure you already know who he is, and he's here to talk about one aspect of his style, a very important aspect of his style, which is blues. So let's bring on the one and only Scott Henderson.
Thanks, Keith. Hi, everybody.
And you notice Scott put on a fresh t-shirt for the show today.
No, it's actually a couple weeks old. You can't smell me, so it's all
Yeah. Well, at least is it the same t-shirt you were wearing back in 81? When did you go to GIT?
Dog t-shirts like for at least 40 years, just because I love, on the back they have funny stuff.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. All right.
Dog Trek and Dog Bar, South Bar.
Yeah, well, Scott and I both went to the Guitar Institute of Technology in Hollywood, which is now called Musicians Institute. So when did you go there? 81?
80.
Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, the first time I heard you, I hadn't met you yet, but I was walking down the hallway, and I heard somebody playing what sounded like a Charlie Parker head, but it sounded like Jeff Beck playing Charlie Parker. and I looked in the room, and it's like, well, who is that guy? And that was you.
Yeah, man. We have known each other 40 years. For sure. Yeah. And I don't know if you remember, but I moved into Don Mock's house when I first moved to LA.
Uh-huh.
He saw my beagle. He had a beagle, and he said, "You guys, why don't you come and live with me?" And then 2 weeks later, he moved out, and we got the house.
Wow.
So they actually say it's a miracle. But the house that I stayed in my first night in LA was the house I ended up living in for 2 years. Crazy.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, we had a great time back then. Don Mock and all the guys who started MI.
Yeah, Don's a phenomenal guitar player from Seattle, fusion master. We could go on and on, but we do have a lot of other guests here. Let's bring them on. Next up, why don't we get Nathan East, ladies and gentlemen. Nathan's a guy that if you don't recognize him, you've seen him, and you've probably seen him as much as you've seen any other musician that you're familiar with, because Nathan's, during the Obama years, they were having tons of concerts at the White House, and every time it would be like gospel night, it would be soul night, it would be blues night, and I'd look up there and say, who's playing bass? Oh, it's Nathan. And I thought, man, you must have said, hey, Barack, can I just leave my stuff set up? Because I'll be back here in a couple of weeks. How you doing, Nathan?
Hey, Keith, how you doing? Hey, everybody. It's good to be here. Oh, those were the days.
Oh,
he
man.
used to come down. We were doing a gospel night there, and he said, you're having a good day when you come down to your living room at 2 in the afternoon and Aretha Franklin is sound check.
Oh, my God. That's insane. Yeah, Nathan, you've been working with Clapton now for close to 40 years. Is it? When did you join that band?
Oh, yeah. It was about 83. We did the first record together, Behind the Sun, and then we did his August album after that, and then started touring. So we've been ripping and running around the world for coming up on 40 years. Enjoying every minute, too.
Oh, man. And you've done all of his guitar festivals, his annual Chicago guitar thing, right?
From the first one in 2004, and then, with B.B. King and all the guys, Buddy Guy, and, it's just a lot of fun to be in the company of that royalty.
Well, you have literally played with every major living blues artist. I'm trying to think of people you haven't played with, and I'm coming up short. Because, it just seems like you've been on stage or hung out with every one of the people that we're probably going to talk about today. So
it's been great. I'm a fan, and obviously, just growing up and listening to those guys, and then getting a chance to play with them, it's been just great.
Man. Yeah, phenomenal. Well, also here on the guitar, we got another Los Angeles guitar shredder, or guitar strangler, as we call him in the blues world. And he's in Nashville as we speak, but none other than Josh Smith.
What's happening, Keith? What's happening?
All right. Yeah, and y'all have probably seen Josh. I see you on YouTube. It's like you got a corner of YouTube with your name on it. There's you playing with everybody.
Oh, I don't know about that. But, it's been keeping myself busy during a world with no gigs,
Yeah, really, yeah. Well, I see you seriously, like jamming with everybody who's kind of a known blues artist in the contemporary world. Joe Bonamassa, our very own Kirky Franklin, who I was hoping to have join us here. He's living in Switzerland, so it's midnight over there. But you've been. You're making records. You're one of the guys. You're carrying the torch right now.
I'm trying to, man. This is the music I love, and I've been doing it. I'm 41. Been playing this. All I've ever wanted to do is play blues and figure out some way to make a living. And they don't always go hand in hand. But I'm having a good time. Yeah.
Well, fantastic. I'm really glad that you could join us, and you and Scott go back a little ways.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. Obviously, it's a panel full of personal heroes, so happy to be included.
Well, speaking of personal heroes, we got one more joining us direct from New York City, the one and only minister of the new super heavy funk, Mr. Mike Clark. There he is, ladies and gentlemen. The sun is shining so bright in New York right now. It's the glare of your own reputation. Yes, indeed. Yeah, Mike Clark, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I met Mike.
Yeah, Mike.
When did you do? We did that video, your drum video for DCI. Was that 20 years ago?
I was hoping it was more like 20.
Yeah, well, it was a while back.
I put these shades on, man, because I wanted to be aloof, hip, and cool. I know
Okay.
new kind of it's a new concept, a musician in shades. So I
Yeah.
decided to try it out here.
Well, it's a
tonight.
blues thing too, man. You got to get
Ring light.
shades.
I bought a new ring light, and I bought a really big one, and it's blinding me. So, it is.
You got to get a pork pie hat. That'll help shade it, you know.
Well,
and then yeah.
I could deal with it. Yeah, maybe you're right. Now
Yeah.
that I see the receding hairline.
Yeah. Well, so I met Mike via the video. I was working on the video that he did, instructional video. It's a great video, by the way. Whether you're a drummer or not, you want to learn about groove, check out Mike's video, because he goes through the whole kind of legacy of blues and funk and soul and jazz drumming and builds it up from the ground. And then recently we had the opportunity to do a string of videos for some schools in Japan, teaching young drummers over there about that whole history as well. And so I had a chance to talk to Mike. And Mike, you told me the story of your first encounter with the one and only Albert King. Maybe tell the folks about your special conversation with Albert.
Well, I've kind of always been a jazz drummer that ends up on either a funk or a blues gig. So I lived in Texas for a while. So some guy heard me playing in my father's garage, heard me shedding when I was about 15, and he said to my dad, "Does your son want to work?" And my father was like, "Yeah, hell yeah, he wants to work." You know, like. So this guy took me out to this roadhouse where Albert King was there. Now, not many people knew of him. This must have been 61 or 2, and there was very few people in the club. And so I didn't know much about playing the blues. Like I say, I played jazz mostly, and I was into Cannonball, Mercy Mercy, and I've always loved a good shuffle from Count Basie to Joe Williams to whoever. So we started to play, and I always had a flair for the James Brown beats. I could always not even practice to do, and I could do them pretty good cold, just straight away when I heard him. So that's how I got a lot of these calls when I was young, because most jazz drummers, really great ones, when they played funk, it sounded more like the Horace Silver type of thing. It didn't sound like the funk we grew up on. You know what I mean? I'm a little younger than those guys. So I go out there and we play. I don't remember what we played, but then we played a shuffle. And he turned around and said to me, "Am I allowed to swear on this show, or shall I not?" I won't. I will. I won't tell you everything that he said. But he said, "Put some bacon fat on it." Those were the, you know, like that. And it was a threat. It wasn't. And I knew what it meant, you know, because I was into soul music real heavy as a teenager as well, but I didn't know how to do it. So when we were playing, this guy came up from the audience, you know, and took the stick out of my left hand, and and everybody, where's the camera? It's backwards. Everybody kind of played this traditional thing. Nobody kind of played a match grip yet. And he said to me, "Just mash down on it a little bit after you hit it." So, in other words, kind of bear down on it for a nanosec after you hit that crack, not too long. And he popped a couple of them in there, and I watched them real close. I took it serious, and I did it. And I could kind of almost do it right away. It took me a while to get comfortable, like 2 weeks, but enough so that Albert didn't beat me to death. I figured out how to do it almost immediately. So, and then at the end of the game, then he was like, "All right." So then I figured, okay, well, I'm not. And so that night when the gig was supposed to pay $15, and this is the sawdust floor barbecue situation right outside the forest, outside of Fort Worth, and he's like, "Step into my office." So naturally, we go to the back of the club, and he puts a chrome, a silver-plated 38 with a snub nose. My father had one like that. He put it in a chair, and he's already 6'4" or 5". I'm 15. He doesn't need a gun. He puts a gun in one chair, and we're like, all right, what do we say, $12? And it was actually 15. But I was like, uh-huh. And that was it. And then he said, come back tomorrow night. Wow. So I did 3 nights.
Wow.
And the bass player's name was Coyote. Check that out.
Oh man, well I was going to ask everybody how you got introduced to the blues, but I think you just did it. Yeah, that was
well, Keith, I met Albert King one time. I got to meet him. I was playing at the North Sea Jazz Festival with Joe Zawinul, and Albert King was there in the cafeteria, and I hated to bother him while he was eating, but I walked up to him, and he, as a gentleman, and he stood up, and I was like, oh my God, he's like,
he's up there,
a big guy, right? And I said, I've been a big fan all my life. I just love your playing. I said, if you ever come to LA, would you consider coming to the school where I teach and do a workshop for the guitar players there? And he said, man, I ain't got nothing to show them kids. I was like, dude, if you played just one note, you would have people falling on their faces asking you questions, and they would be freaking out because they all love you. We all love you so much. And I got to meet him, and he died about a month later.
Oh, man. Yeah. Well, I mean, you hit the nail on the head there, because the only real, well, I shouldn't say the only, but one of the only real straight-up blues legends that played at MI was Albert Collins.
I was there every time he played.
And Albert, I mean, what can you say? If you're familiar with Albert, nothing needs to be said. If you're not familiar with Albert, you got to check him out, because he was one of the iconic blues guitar players of his generation. Died way too young, but the school had a reputation as a school for shredders. It was like guys playing really fast all the time. And so guys would go in there thinking, oh man, if I don't play really fast, they're going to think I suck, And that's what Albert King, no doubt, thought, is like, man, all I do is just hit the one note, and then hit one more. Well, got nothing to say, But Albert Collins got up there, boy, and he rocked that house, and people never forgot that concert. He played there twice, and I got to play with him each time. It was like unbelievable, like having a rocket shoved up your derriere. But man, yeah, that's what it's about right there. Is getting straight to the point and hitting it hard. So Scott, how did you get introduced to the blues? I mean,
through Led Zeppelin. That's the first time I ever heard anything that sounded like blues. Just from and I'm old enough to know, like, when, or to be around during the time where they were playing Whole Lot of Love, the whole tune with the middle part and everything, on AM radio. So I heard that on the radio. Some guy that was over at our house working had a boom box, and Led Zeppelin came out. Jimmy Page came out with that solo after the middle part, and that said, that's it. I know what I want to do. Well, that was it for me. And then, I had no idea that those white musicians, Richie Blackmore, Jimmy Page, who was I listening to? Jeff Beck, Jimi Hendrix. I thought they started the blues. I had no idea that the blues started way earlier with mostly black musicians from the 50s, the 40s and 50s. And I didn't know about them until much, much later, years later. Because I didn't, I went chronologically backwards and started listening to those guys and realized where those guys got that whole concept from. Started listening to guys like Albert King, Muddy Waters, John Lee Hooker. So yeah, I went kind of backwards in time.
Yeah, that's kind of the typical arc. That's what happened for me too. The first 2 albums I bought ever in my life, I think, were Marty Robbins' Gunfighter Ballads and Trail Songs, which was El Paso, huge hit record, and the guitar player Grady Martin. I mean, I'm still in awe of that. But then it was the Ventures live in Japan, and I heard the Ventures. I didn't realize that they were basically playing blues with a twang, the Mosrite guitars and the tons of reverb. And so, like you, I started listening to Hendrix, Zeppelin, Cream, all the blues rock bands, and I thought, like you, these guys are amazing. They came up with all this stuff. And then realized, oh, wait a minute, Whole Lot of Love, that sounds a lot like that Muddy Waters song, You Need Love, And sure enough, there's been lawsuits about all that. But that was the introduction for most of the white kids in the 60s, definitely was blues rock. And then the ones that got into it, we all went backwards. Like Josh, you're younger. You're the young guy. What was your introduction?
I guess it was a lot of just luck. My parents are not musicians, but they just love music. They had my dad still has a huge record collection. It was mostly rock and roll, but also there was a lot of Albert King, B.B. King, Otis Rush, Magic Sam, and a lot of jazz too. So they just had a good record collection. And I remembered something about B.B. King and Albert King and Otis Rush just grabbing me from the first minute I heard it. And I honestly, I couldn't even tell you why. I mean, I started playing guitar when I was 6, but that was the first stuff I remember having an interest in was hearing Albert King bend strings. I mean, Albert King, he's still probably the only thing, and I listen to all music and love everything, but Albert King's probably the only thing I listen to almost every day of my life. And it still surprises me every time. Drives my son nuts. It's my favorite thing in the world.
And I mean that I'm 100% with you on that. And my daughter, she goes for it. She's like way into that stuff.
Oh,
and
when he hits something, I'll audibly let out a woof. And my son always goes, "Why do you do that?" And I'm like, "You feel that."
Yeah. It's well, my introduction to Albert King, when I had probably heard him without knowing it was him, but when I knew it was him, I can remember, I mean, this is like a snapshot in my brain here. I can remember driving down a street in my car in San Rafael, California, and on the radio came on The Sky is Crying, Albert's version of The Sky is Crying, The sky is crying. Right? And when I heard that song, I had to pull over. And it was like, what? Is it going? It's like 3 or 4 notes, but it just gets right to the heart of things. And ever since then, and that was freaking almost 50 years ago, never looked back with him either. And like Mike, you and I talked about Al Jackson Jr. and that rhythm section, and how it's the crossover between blues and soul, which evolved into funk, and you had, Clyde Stubblefield and Jabbo Starks, Jabbo playing with Bobby Bland and then getting hired away by James Brown. And so the blues kind of inspired that entire realm of music. It wasn't just playing shuffles, it was like the launching pad for a whole new thing.
I remember my father would listen to Wynonie Harris and Wine Spodioti. This is when I was really little.
Oh, yeah.
A bunch of Wynonie Harris records and Louis Prima and Louis Jordan. So that was his party music, and he partied, pretty much every night. But I remember hearing, I'd done a couple of gigs with Albert Collins myself and Otis Rush. And I remember hearing Frosty and having to pull over. I looked down, I had a 64 Chevy, and it was loaded up. It was a fast car. Frosty came on, and I looked at the speedometer in a 45 mile an hour. So, he had me, boy. So I pulled over, it was way after he recorded Frosty, but I'd never heard it before.
Yeah. Yeah, that the same reaction for me, and he would do it every night, of course. It was his signature song. and he had the 150-foot guitar chord, and he'd be out there in the audience playing, and I mean, that's show business right there. But the music is just so phenomenal. Nathan, I mean, you said we were talking on another occasion, and you said that you grew up in San Diego, and you got a legit music education from a college, right, and learned all the notes, and then you got a gig. You had a band, right? Your own band, and you guys were playing, I guess, clubs, parties, whatnot. And you got hired by Barry White, right? And you went on the road with Barry. Was that your first pro gig?
Barry White, 16 years old. I was on the road with playing the Apollo Theater and Madison
Woo!
Square Garden with Barry White, which was crazy. You know.
Oh man!
Wow.
And how did that evolve? Like what happened after that? How long did you do that?
Play for an all-female audience.
Yeah, right. The lingerie was stacked up on stage at the end of the show.
I only play for men.
It was exciting because we had the Love Unlimited Orchestra, so there we are in tuxedos, and he was so popular, so he was selling out arenas, and I remember doing Cobo Arena in Detroit. And it seems like back in the day there were a lot of shows and reviews, so I met James Jamerson in Detroit at Cobo Arena, and he was playing one of the gigs, and just seems like music was just always playing in the neighborhood. We'd hear Marvin Gaye out there, Gladys Knight, and then B.B. King, and I can just remember hearing those tunes. One of the first bass lines I learned was James Brown, Top of the Stack. And I remember thinking, wow, how cool it is to be able to play that,
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, he was the funkiest guy, and so you hear that, but then there's like a hybrid of funk, blues, jazz, and then Hendrix was out there, and then one of the next bass lines I learned was,
oh no! Little did you know.
Little did I know that 30 years later I'd be playing with the man himself.
Oh man, that's insane. So did you play with any of those like the straight up blues guys at that point in your career, or was it mostly playing other like more contemporary styles?
Yeah, just kind of more contemporary. I got Quincy Jones started calling me for sessions, and Joe Sample called me. I was doing his records, and then it just seemed like I got a nice wide variety of gigs and people that I started hanging with, and it was it was great.
So when you got together with Eric, you were ready. You knew the repertoire, you knew the background. You could go in any direction.
Yeah, it was, and that's the fun thing about, like, back in the day, there wasn't really much distinction of, you didn't have to be in a genre to get played. You had Miles Davis, and then Jimi Hendrix, James Brown would all be on the same radio station. So
yeah,
and
the festivals.
Nice, and at the festival, so you didn't have to, you didn't have to get locked into one kind of music. So we were listening to everything. Wes Montgomery, I remember my father bringing some West records home, and it was like, wow, this guy can play,
Yeah, that was such a. I mean, now I feel like a geezer. Well, back in the day, you kids of today, you had no idea. But seriously, it was so wide open musically. Everything was kind of just getting turned on its head. I was so lucky. I saw Miles at this little club in D.C. called the Cellar Door. It's about as big as your living room, and they recorded that show, and it came out as the album called Live Evil, which was right on the heels of Bitches Brew. And it was when Miles was like totally flipping the whole sound of jazz on its head, and he was getting John McLaughlin played on that record, and nobody knew who he was. He was just. He had no hair, and at that time, if you didn't have hair, you weren't cool, And I thought, man, he must have just got out of the army or something, because his head is shaved, But anyway, just and going to festivals, I was seeing, on the same afternoon, see Sly and Buddy Guy and the Edwin Hawkins Singers and Country Joe and the Fish. It's like
insane.
I think
I was there.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking of Buddy, I mean Buddy is about the last living icon of that era. Do you know of anybody else, Nathan, that you would hold up in the same light that comes from that same generation?
Well, we lost BB King, not too long ago, and
Yeah,
I think you're right. The Buddy Guy still keeping the torch burning. And of
man.
course, if you go all the way back, Robert Johnson, and you really hear the Muddy Waters, and you hear the origin, like the DNA of all these guys that we just mentioned.
Yeah,
And it's amazing because and actually, with playing with Eric, he's just such a student of the blues that I've learned a lot just by hanging with him, because he goes deep. We did a tribute to Robert Johnson album, where I got to get familiar with a lot of cool tunes on that, and you
did that chess thing too. That it was like doing Walter tunes and stuff like that.
Yeah. So you really get to, if you go dig deep enough, you really get to hear the origin of what we all have been playing. And,
yeah.
And it's kind of like an archaeological dig, where you hear that riff and say, "Oh, that sounds like, oh, now I know where they got that from."
Totally. Yeah, I mean, to me, I went through this thing, Scott, you were talking about the same thing. It's like you reach a certain point where you say, okay, I've kind of heard what inspires me. Now I got to go backwards, And so people say, what do you listen to now? I say, well, I listen to stuff from like the 20s, Lonnie Johnson, I'm working on this Lonnie Johnson too. It was like, well, what? But it was like 100 years ago. It was 1920 was the first commercial blues record. That was Mamie Smith doing Crazy Blues, and that kicked off the whole blues craze. It made blues into a commercial style, so it wasn't like a local thing anymore. It was like national, and all those bands sounded like jazz bands. Trombone, trumpet. They would have a banjo, not even a guitar. And the drum kit was kind of assembled. Like a marching bass drum and a snare and a couple of tin cans or cymbals or whatever. And sounded totally different than what we hear today. But then you had, about 1925, you had Blind Lemon Jefferson. And suddenly he was such a phenomenal player and singer, and he became that icon of the guy with a guitar strapped to his back, and playing and singing. And he kind of, all the classic blues singers were women, Bessie Smith, Ma Rainey. Of course, Ma Rainey's getting a lot of press right now because they're doing that movie about her. And Bessie Smith, Victoria Spivey, and classy women, Jules, Pearls, and then suddenly Blind Lemon comes along, and they saw they could sell a bunch of records with him. So anyway, it seems like, the minute they recorded the stuff, it kind of stopped being, well, I guess here's a question. Is there such a thing as pure blues? Is there a blues that is not somehow or other a fusion of blues with something else? Or is there a thing that you could listen to and you could point to and say, no, that's the real deal right there?
Yeah, I think if you go back to the beginning and listen to the guys that didn't even, there was no bass, they were just like one chord, and they were living the blues.
Yeah. Well, you had those like that. Well, Charlie Patton, they didn't record him until he was older, but yeah, he had been doing it down in the Delta in the teens and the 20s, and that was the down home blues, because those guys were not getting paid, and so they were doing it because it was survival music,
Right.
Well, what about, like, when I think of blues, the flip side of the blues coin is gospel, right?
Absolutely.
And so like, are any of you guys particularly influenced by or listening to gospel? And two sides of the same coin. They're totally intertwined. But for years I was just blues all the time. And then suddenly I got kind of turned on to stuff like the Staple Singers, and then of course Sister Rosetta Tharpe, and a whole line of artists that were not blues singers, but they sure sounded like they could stand on the same stage, and just it was different subject matter. And you guys like sort of into any sort of a gospel thread?
If I listen to gospel music, I'll catch on fire.
Oh no! Oh no! The devil's got you. You're gonna. The Lord will cast you out. Well, that was true for all those guys though, because they all well, Blind Lemon Jefferson. His first records, they put the name on the label as Reverend C.L. Bates because they didn't think they could sell records by a blues guy, but they could sell records by a preacher. So he sang the preaching blues, and same thing with Son House and all those guys, they kind of showed up on Sunday morning, and they were also there, on Saturday night. So it was always that kind of crossover. I don't know. To me, it's like blues. Willie Dixon wrote that song, which I don't think was a great song, but it was called "The Blues Had a Baby," and they called it rock and roll. And to me, it's like gospel had a baby, and they called it soul. Because that whole soul sound, Sam Cooke is a perfect example of a guy came up in the gospel world and crossed over. Aretha, obviously, So, yeah, it's like if you're listening to one, you're listening to both, kind of, because they definitely intertwine.
You know what? You know how some of those guys, like I played a little bit. Whenever I played with these guys, I was never in their band. I was in the club that they came in to play,
Uh-huh.
And we used to play 6-7 nights a week in the club those days for years. So you could back up, played with O.C. Smith and all of these different cats. He was a more modern, souped up kind of Joe Williams cat, But I also played with Jimmy Reed a little bit, and he would. It wasn't like a 12-bar thing. I'm sure we all have experienced this, but he just, you just had to hang out until,
yeah, right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you couldn't guide him into anything. He didn't want any of that. You just had to follow him. So he changed or maybe not at all.
That's some of the baddest stuff, though. When John Lee Hooker goes 13 bars or whatever, or Guitar Slim comes in singing Things I Used to Do,
Yeah.
on the 4, singing the 1, and
Yeah.
everybody has to rearrange. I love that.
Yeah, that is hilarious. I'm thinking, what are those guys? They're in the studio, they're cutting the record, they're probably on take number 47. It's like, we got to get this damn thing done, let's just play it out,
I know a few people that played in his band over the years, and they always told me, expect the unexpected, because you're playing and all of a sudden he's skipped a bar or gone on to the next bar or whatever, and you have to be ready to jump on that with him because you never know if it's going to be 7 bars or 5 bars or the traditional 4 bars, because it could go anywhere and he could do anything, and he counts on the people to just follow his lead. So that must have been a fun gig, just to kind of have to keep your ears open to what happens.
Yeah, there's a hilarious video. You can see it on YouTube. It's Lightnin' Hopkins on Austin City Limits. I mean, back in the 70s, that show's been around forever. And Lightnin' was the same thing. It was like, there was a guy, actually, he went to GIT, and he played with, oh, God, I can't remember who he played with. Lonnie Brooks, I think. He said, the chord change would be on the if of and. So, like you say, Mike, it just happens when it happens, and if you don't hit it, well, you try to catch up to it. Anyway, you can see Lightning on Austin City Limits. He's playing his Strat on the treble pickup, the brightest, like ice pick in the brain kind of sound you ever heard. Sounds great, and he's got the suit and the hat and the sunglasses and the whole thing. And there's a bass player behind him playing a Rickenbacker bass, and then a drummer with a full kit, and they're way behind him. And you can tell those guys are sweating bullets the whole time because they have no idea what's going to happen next. And he's always turning around and looking at him, and you can just imagine.
Well,
If fan. I
I
love
could
it.
bring the conversation back just for a minute to electric guitar
Mm-hmm.
and Albert.
Mm.
So one of the things that I think really stands out about why we all love him so much is because his tone was very, very different from all the other cats. And I'm not saying that they didn't have good tone, but Albert's tone was special. And Albert's tone was really like a rock guitar player like me who grew up not just listening to the notes, but the tones. Richie Blackmore was all about tone. Jimmy Page was all about tone. Jeff Beck, all about tone. So for a guy who grew up listening not only just to the notes, but what does this guy sound like? What is this guy offering sonically? When I first heard Albert King, I said, this guy was probably where they got it from. Like where they got the balance of treble, mid-range, and bass and put it all into a really musical sound that just kicks ass. It just sounds great. No matter what register he was playing on the guitar, what a beautiful tone, you know? And of course it's in your fingers, some of it in the gear, but of course it's in your fingers. And I think that's why Albert King was so incredibly popular with electric guitarists whose basic foundation was in rock, because they could listen to this guy and go, yeah, he's an old guy, he's a blues guitarist, but he's got a tone that just kills. And I don't think anybody's tone was as good as his.
Do you remember the guitar solo in Bill Doggett's Honky Tonk?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Billy Bob.
Woo,
Yeah.
baby.
Yeah.
I played with Bill. I played with the Showman uptown with him for years.
Uh-huh.
You know, I'm not going to go into the stories, but you know I got him. Oh my goodness! But he would on that particular tune, which we'd have to play sometimes twice a set. Can you believe that?
Part 1, part 2.
Yeah, well, it was. You're right about.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
It was because they would bring in tour buses from Japan and all over, so everybody would be. But he would ask the guitar player to please use the tone if he could and play the solo. Play the solo. The rest of the night, play whatever you want. But and also on Stormy Monday, I'm not a guitarist, but that with Bobby Blue Bland, that's a hell of a solo too. I played with him once. Not
Wayne Bennett.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Bennett, all timer, right there on that solo.
Sir. Yes, sir. I played with him one night at the China Club. I don't know if you guys know the great blues guitar player Danny Dreyer. Do you know that cat?
Mm-hmm.
Danny is mean, and he was musical director for Otis Rush. That's how I would get on all these gigs. But we played with Wayne Bennett, and man, I must have been 50, and I was act like I was 11 around him. I just couldn't stop talking about that solo. I drove him nuts.
Yeah.
Poor cat.
Yeah, that was just that's an icon. It's like further on up the road. That one,
It's like a love supreme. You couldn't have written it any better.
No.
You know what I mean? You know, like, I mean, according to me, of course, I'm not a guitarist.
Yeah.
You know what you hear, man, and you know when you hear something that's classic and you can't change one iota of it. It's written in stone.
Yes, it is.
That's it. I mean, it's done. There's no. If you're going to play that song, you got to play the solo off the record. Otherwise, you're not playing the song. That's when the solo becomes classic. Like you can't play Kid Charlemagne if you don't play Larry Carlton's solo. That's it. You know, that's it. It's just the way it is. That's how it is.
Yeah.
I did a gig with Schofield and Dr. Lonnie, and we were playing Straight Ahead and some Wild Funk and, you know, whatever. We just played whatever. But we did play Stormy Monday, and John played the whole solo, man, and I almost fainted.
Oh, my God.
Man. You know what I mean? Because I've been listening to that solo since I was 14.
I've been in so many top 40 bands where I played the whole solo of the. We played "Going Down" by Jeff Beck. I played every single note that he played, not one note of my own. That's how the song goes. You don't play your own shit. You play Jeff Beck's shit because it's his tune. So, you know, I mean, of course, there's songs where I improvise on, but man, just stepping into the shoes of those greats and learning their solos and playing them note for note, tone for tone, and to be in those shoes for that amount of time, it teaches you something, man. It really does. And I've done it with saxophone players and keyboard players. And speaking of that, I just got to say this. I gotta just kiss Mike Clark's ass for a second here and say that this guy's the reason I got into jazz at all, because I was playing funk, nothing but funk. If it wasn't funk, I didn't want to hear it. And then and if somebody played me straight ahead jazz, I was just like, oh God, this is the most boring shit. But then I heard Herbie Hancock Thrust with Mike Clark on drums. And that album was like, whoa, you're kidding me. You can play jazz that funky? And I was like, that's it for me. Like, the song Actual Proof changed my life. And to get to play on tour for a couple weeks or maybe 3 weeks with Mike and get to play that tune with the guy who played it on the record, that was a hell of a thing. Thank you, Mike.
That was fun. And I blew up his car. It was a rock car.
Yeah. We stopped for gas and Mike put diesel in the van.
I put diesel in the car and the truck stopped. We drove a half a mile and we ended up at like some crazy cat's house that we don't know that offered to fix the car. We were there for 6 hours.
We were playing in Chicago that night and we pulled up right on the mark to just get our shit on stage, play the gig. We actually had a good gig that night. It was amazing that we did
a great gig after all that.
Full day.
Yeah.
Pit bulls, and I'm afraid the pit bulls are sniffing me and I'm like, oh man, this ain't,
Awesome. Who would have known though? I mean, you asked the guy. Me and Jeff just went in to get some coffee. Jeff Berlin. Hey, Mike, can you put some gas in the truck? Sure, man, no problem. Get out on the freeway. Van dies, and you go, Mike, what color was that pump?
Green.
Wasn't the black one, was it?
No.
Yeah, it was the black one. But hey, man, East Coaster, man, New Yorker, he's not supposed to know this kind of stuff, right?
That's right, man. You got somebody else to fix the car, take care of that business.
Else fill up the damn
I don't know how we did that. We just ended up in this guy who we don't know watching TV, watching the game. There was some sporting event that was cool.
Actually watching the Bears. Bears won, and that night we played in Chicago. Unbelievable. Unbelievable day.
Damn.
Man,
Anyway,
can I ask Mike and Nathan a question? I'm curious about when they were, listening to this stuff coming up, how much they dug into the cats who were playing drums and bass on the records, like Freddie Belo or Sonny Freeman or Sam Lay or whatever, or Willie Dixon and, the guys in the Aces, stuff like that. Was that something, could you even find out who was playing on that stuff back then? Was that something you guys looked into?
Yes, sir. I'll just make this quick, and then you got it. I found out, it was my business to find out, and I studied them. But I was all way into the jazz thing before Elvin and Tony. I mean, Max and Philly and Big Sid, but I was also into Count Basie's drummer, and I would go meet them, and I was into Sonny Freeman. Hell yeah. I was listening to him today. You Upset Me, Baby.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mike, I would like to ask you a question, just because I've always been curious, and I don't know why I never asked you this on the road. Maybe I did and forgot. But when you join Herbie Hancock's band and you hear these tunes like Butterfly and Actual Proof and this repertoire that he had, this book that he had, in your mind, had anyone ever done that before? Like, brought this kind of heavy harmony jazz into a funk situation? I mean, I think you guys might have been the first guys ever.
Paul Jackson and I had about 80,000 bands before we met Herbie. Paul met him first. And we had bands that were attempting a very similar thing, but nobody could write and reharm and had harmony that I knew at 22 years old when I was like Herbie Hancock. You know what I mean? So, and when I first auditioned for him, I was way into Elvin and Tony, so I approached it like that, and he was like, "No, we're not doing that." And then Paul had told Herbie, he said, "Mike plays some upside down, backwards funk." And Herbie said, "Play that backwards shit you play," and I did, and he hired me.
To me, I draw a direct line between what you guys were doing and what Sly did with that tune In Time, which to me is still the funkiest tune ever written on the band.
I played a couple of shows with Sly, but he was a disc jockey, and he was not he didn't have a band yet, but he was arranging for a soul singer named Bobby Freeman. And so I would back up Bobby every once in a while, and Sly would be on the gig.
Had you heard the tune In Time before you played Actual Proof?
I think so, but I wasn't influenced by any of that. Actual Proof was like kind of where I was coming from.
Right.
Yeah, I wasn't influenced. Like David Garibaldi and I had heard each other, but we had no connection. I wasn't listening to him. I was after I heard him, but we were both in a similar direction. But I was kind of Elvin, Roy Haynes, Jack, Tony, Philly, Joe, Clyde and Jabbo, and then me.
Well, I know you and Lenny White are good friends.
We were then too, yeah.
Yeah, and I got to play with Lenny in Russia for 3 or 4 gigs at this club, Koskov Club in Moscow. He blew me away.
Oh man, he's amazing.
His funky beats, and he said to us, guys, I was in an accident and I don't want to play any big fancy solos. I'm not a chops guy. I'm not going to be playing big blender fills and everything. I'm not like a fusion guy. I'm just going to play beats. And I got on stage and my mouth was on the floor. I was like, this is one of the best times I've ever had playing music.
Oh, yeah, he's ridiculous. Yes.
Unbelievable. Yeah. So incredibly funky and so incredibly musical. And I know you guys come from the similar places, and
we play together. We have a double drum band, so I hear you when he's
and
he can.
I'd love to see that.
Oh my God! Yeah.
Wow.
Well, hey, bringing it back to Josh's question. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're back. We're back. Okay. Yeah. So Josh, you were asking Mike and Nate about listen to the rhythm section. I mean, we're guitar players, the 3 of us. And so naturally, I mean, I just listen to guitar players. I wouldn't listen to the singer. It's like, I don't give a shit what they're singing about, When's the guitar solo coming up, And then gradually your eyes open a little bit. But you guys, you are the foundation of the whole thing. And Nathan, we played together for a minute up there in Napa. And what struck me is as we're playing the shuffle, just the straight up, Jimmy Reed, whatever kind of stuff. I could tell that you are adjusting your technique. Oh, we lost you, Nathan.
Uh-oh.
You still there?
Let me see if I can get us back. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Okay, let me see. There we go.
There you are. Okay. So anyway, I think maybe, Josh, help me out, but I think this is relevant to what you're talking about. When you go back in blues, of course, the electric bass came in when? In like 55?
Yeah, something like that.
The P bass? And before that, it was all upright. And there was that point in the middle there where, like with Walter's band, you had 2 electric guitars and one guitar player would be playing playing the bass patterns on the low strings of the guitar, and the other guy would be playing the normal guitar stuff. But did you listen to those guys like Big Crawford with Muddy, Willie Dixon, that whole sound of that acoustic bass and the style in which they played the upright?
Oh yeah, I mean, it was like, as a matter of fact, it's fun to still revisit all of that because you hear how simple, and a lot of times I don't think they really were technical. They were just kind of just keeping a pulse going, and so that's one of the things I listen for. And when we talk about tone, which is one of the things I try to emphasize in my lessons here at Artist Works, is that tone is just so important as to the way it blends with the other instruments. So you kind of get your own tone, and it always amazes me how, like, say guitar, for instance, 2 guys can pick it up, and when B.B. King plays that one note, there's only one guy that plays it like that, B.B. King. Eric picks it up. He plays. When we did Riding with the King album, it was fun to listen to them trading solos, and you could close your eyes and go, okay, there goes BB. there goes Eric, and it's just, I think it's important, when we talk about this, is just to go back and dig as deep as we can and listen, which to this day I just enjoy doing, because I always find like these little gems. And how do they approach, like, are you going to go up to the 5 chord, or are you going to go down to it, or what's your turnaround at the end, and all those little things end up being characteristic of what was really happening in the blues.
Yeah. And it goes so deep, and I don't know, Josh, if you've had the same experience, but I play with really good bass players and drummers, but they don't really know the style, and so they kind of gravitate by default to, like, well, there's a shuffle is a shuffle is a shuffle, and a walking line is a walking line, and it's like, not really, you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, in the blues, coming from more of a blues background, there's you play with fantastic musicians all the time, but who necessarily haven't done all the blues homework. So they've got a shuffle, and they've got a feel or whatever. And I treat blues the same way I treat jazz or R&B and soul. It's not just one thing. It's there's Chicago and Detroit and Memphis and Texas. Same way when I play soul, I may be playing like Teenie Hodges or Cornell Dupree, or as if I'm in Memphis playing like Steve Cropper or whatever. There's a lot of homework there, and that's one thing about blues that I had a question for everybody about. The level of respect that some guys give blues. We all know those guys who talk about blues. That's simple blues, so they don't put in like the amount of homework. And it's inspiring for me to hear you guys talk about it, like Mike to talk about. I know you've listened to this stuff and these guys, but we all know the guys who haven't done that, and they just treat it like it's simple music when it really isn't.
No, it's layers. I always tell my students, I say the top layer is the notes you can see on the page. But that's just the beginning.
Bringing up something else, Josh, remember that gig we did together where Josh called me for a gig down at the beach, and it was me and Josh, and who was playing bass?
Travis Carlton.
Travis Carlton was playing bass, Larry's son, and Joel Taylor on drums. And I was like, okay, this is a blues gig, right? You called Joel Taylor because Joel Taylor's a jazz drummer I've played with many times. He played with Holsworth. He's a incredible jazz fusion drummer. He plays all styles. But when he laid it down on that gig, it blew me away, because he did not one time go into anything that resembled any of his fusion jazz vocabulary. He played the damn blues, and he played funk, and sounded like he was from Muscle Shoals. And I was like, wow, this is a guy that really knows how to play blues.
Well, it's funny. Solid. I don't play with Joel that often, but he's an example of that. Like the first time I played with Joel, I had the same thought you had. Like, am I going to dig this? He played with Holdsworth and all these guys, and is he going to play blues? And we were playing a slow blues, and he did stops in the way that they are on It's My Own Fault on Live from the Regal, which you would only know if you've listened to Live from the Regal, because it's not something that's on every version. Right. And he just did them instinctively in a slow blues, and it was like, well, no, this guy listens to blues,
Yeah.
Live at the Regal is a Bible, man.
Yeah. Totally.
Oh my God.
Yeah, the piano parts on that are like that's how you play rhythm guitar,
Dude, you want the story. The piano parts on that record, Duke Jethro had never played piano on BB's Gang before that night. He only played organ, and they got to the Regal to record, and they had no organ. He had to play piano on that record, on the gig.
Oh, man.
George Coleman on saxophone?
Yeah.
It's George, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Wow. He's amazing. He's just amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, as we're talking about all this stuff, what comes to mind is, we're talking about this whole giant range of styles. There's jazz and there's funk, and there, put all these labels on it: soul, rhythm and blues, whatever. But we all know, and the conversation makes this clear, it's all coming out of blues at the core. There's blues right sitting in the middle of it, and then it branches out, and it takes on the coloration of a different beat or a different harmony, but the blues is still kind of right there at the core. So I guess here's a question: what is it that makes blues still sound like blues when you take away almost everything that you think of as blues? It ain't a shuffle, it ain't 12 bars, The guy's not playing a pentatonic scale. Why is it still blues? Why do we still think of it as bluesy? What makes it bluesy?
One aspect of it is playing rubato, because so many guys don't understand the importance of being able to float over a time structure. They can't not pay attention to the beat. They
Right.
can float over it. So in the same way that you would play rubato over a ballad, you can also play rubato over a shuffle. You don't have to dig in and play every one of those da 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 da. You don't have to do that. Stevie Ray did, and a lot of other guys did. They really stayed with the time. First time I heard Hendrix, I thought this guy doesn't know how to play because I didn't understand him. Because every other rock guitarist I heard, Ritchie Blackmore, Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page, they all played time, But here's a guy who's not paying attention to the time at all. He's floating and playing rubato phrases that have nothing to do with the drums or the bass. And I thought, whoa. Then I started hearing horn players doing that and playing some of that pentatonic stuff. I mean, it definitely, you can't say that pentatonic doesn't have something to do with the blues, because it does. Because when you start playing those 5 notes, you automatically associate it with blues. So when you hear a guy playing those 5 notes in a minor key and playing rubato in any kind of a time form, it's blues, man. The guy's been listening to blues if he does that. Wayne Shorter does it. Miles Davis did it, and just about every horn player you can imagine that's been influenced by blues does it. So you just can't mistake that sound when you hear it.
Well, this is a good opportunity, I think, to play that track off of your record. And this is a funny thing.
Oh man, you shouldn't listen to that.
No. This is the real down home. This is Scott on his back porch,
You don't want to hear
drunk out of his mind,
always.
just playing an acoustic guitar with 3 strings on it. Man, it's awesome. But seriously, I remember one time Kirk Fletcher came to MI and you guys were jamming, and you were playing. You had some tracks on your iPad, like you were jamming to those tracks. And you said to Kirk, "Okay, Kirk, yeah, let's play a blues." And you threw something up there that was, I don't know what the time signature was. Wasn't any kind of shuffle I ever heard, like when you sent me this track and said you might want to play this on our little conversation today, you said, well, here's a bluesy thing off my new record. So let's listen to this bluesy thing off of Scott's record and see what Scott is calling that bluesy thing. Marcus, you got that track? That's an Albert King lick right there.
Too many damn notes, if you ask me.
Well, I used to I give you a hard time because I say, Scott, can you just play the root on the damn downbeat one time? And sure enough,
Oh my God!
right? It was there. There you go. It was there. So that was it, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few blues licks in there. There's some definitely some blues influence for sure.
Well, the way you started the, that's stone cold right there. Listen, we got a couple of questions here about. One of them has to do with altered scales in blues, and they sent that to you, Josh, and you're kind of looking the other way, like who, what, where?
I can answer it, but Scott can probably answer it better than I can.
I've heard Josh do it too. Guilty of altered scales in the blues.
I am guilty of altered scales. Probably not as guilty as Scott, but I am guilty. Yeah.
Okay, so what? Give an example.
Well, less of an example of like theoretical reason for it. I'll say that when I use any altered scale or idea, I'm trying to still make it feel like I'm Magic Sam when I do it. It's like I'm with anything like that I play. It's almost like I'm holding it back until I hear it so much that it comes out phrased like as if Albert King or Otis Rush plays it, so it feels natural to me and not like I'm squeezing it in. If that makes sense, I don't know.
Totally. Yeah, because if you're thinking about it, it does sort of intrude. It calls attention to itself. But if you're hearing it, it just seems like, whoa, what was that? That was cool,
Yeah.
I think people that when they try to force it in because they learned it in school is when it starts sounding way out of context.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, this is okay. So this is a question for all you guys then. Coming from, being a blues guy, as you start to learn more music and get more sophisticated in your knowledge, this was a thing that was tough for me as a kid, almost feeling okay with what was I allowed to play in the blues world. And honestly, it was not just listening to Lonnie Johnson and T-Bone Walker and Charlie Christian and Wes and guys, but also listening to guys like you, Scott, and especially listening to Robin and Larry, and knowing it was okay to play this other stuff. And it didn't mean like I was cheating on the blues. Like when I listen to Robin, nobody respects blues more than Robin. He's done his homework. How did you feel about that when you were, learning all that new stuff?
I didn't know because, I've been fortunate enough that I don't want to say fortunate because that's a bad word. I've been mainly in my own groups, so no one tells me what to do. It's not like somebody's going to throw a beer bottle at me if I play something that isn't traditional blues, where if I was a sideman in a blues group, band leader could get pissed off if I played something that didn't sound enough, that didn't have enough tradition in it. They might say, "What is that you're playing? That's not part of what we're doing here," and they might give me some shit about it. But since I'm doing my own groups, I only have me to blame for the stuff that I do, right?
Yeah.
And I can't really say that I ever had a problem. I mean, I've done some records that were. I'd say that my Dog Party album and my Tore Down House album, Thelma Houston on vocals, Mazda Edward on vocals, and the thing is really the whole album is, I'd say, pretty traditional. There's no jazz licks on it, so I'm totally happy in that environment playing just straight ahead blues. I love it, and I don't feel like I need to play jazz when it's not in the context, when it's not in the right context. And Keith knows, Keith was on that record, on the Dog Party record. And it was a real fun to just roll tape and play some blues, just like we did when we were playing down at the beach with Joel. We were pretty much playing straight ahead blues tunes and having a blast, man. I didn't really feel the need to throw a bunch of, I probably did at some point, but
you did.
And but you know what I mean, though. Sometimes you feel like there's a place and a time, and sometimes it's the right time to throw that stuff in. Sometimes it's not, and I'm cool with either one.
Yeah. Well, I think Josh, you hit the nail on the head. It's hearing it and working it into your subconscious to where it comes out as a natural thing. It's just that's the way it wants to go, and you're not standing in the way, but you're not making it go there either. It's that natural quality. Maybe that's the thing that when we talk about what is it of blues that makes blues that is bluesy, like on that, the track that from your record, that's not in any stretch like a traditional blues groove, right? But nonetheless, I hear the blues in your phrasing, and in the flow, and in the swing, the dynamics and swing being kissing cousins, and just in the way that you give each note its I say this a lot to my students, but it's full musical value,
Yeah, there's a lot of intent when you listen to Albert King. He means every single note.
Yeah,
you know what I mean, or any of these guys, Otis Rush, Magic.
Every note. There's a group on every note. Mm-hmm. So that's the thing. It's not just notes. Every note is played with a full intention.
Yeah.
Of having that note seriously mean something. He's telling a story.
Yeah.
And that story is more important than any individual thing. I mean, the story is what's important. That's why those guys see the big picture. From the beginning of their thing to the end, they see the story they're telling, and you know what else? They remember what they play. That's the main problem I have with my students. They don't remember what they play. Yeah. So they can't tell a story, and you can't have something that you play be influenced by what you just played before if you don't remember what you just played before. Yeah. And so I have to try to tell my students, don't just play something and throw it in the trash can. Try to remember what you play and take it somewhere. Take it to, see what you can say with that one little idea instead of just playing phrase after phrase and throwing it in the can like you didn't play it.
Well, repetition is the essence of style. I mean, you go to see BB, you're gonna, if he doesn't play BB King licks, you're gonna be pissed off. You want to hear him play the same shit that he's been playing for 20. Rest his soul. But the same stuff that he played for 50 years, you wanted to hear it in year 51 because that's who you came to hear. And so he's not making stuff up, but he plays it like it's the first time.
Yeah. You guys, will we hear guys do that anymore because of the amount of information available to him? Like when I hear Johnny Guitar Watson, he stumbled upon something that no one could ever sound like. And it was, he listened to people, but it wasn't like there's no way he had the entire catalog of everybody available to him. So he came up with his own sound, same way Albert King did. Albert Collins tuned his guitar to E minor, and came up with something. It's harder to do that now, I think.
Well, it's become a pretty technical. There's the technical thing, and this brings me. We're running out of time, so just to kind of summarize what we're talking about here. Okay, we know blues has a 100-year history. We know that each one of you guys has built a style around that foundation, and we know that to be a what we think of as a good musician, a well-rounded musical player, you got to have that foundation. Otherwise, you're just missing the post underneath it. But where are we going from here? When I think about the history of blues and like who is a known blues artist? Well, you got Robert Johnson, who's he's been mythologized. You got Clapton, who is now the icon of the blues sound because he's still alive. You know what I mean? And you got B.B. King, who became the America's bluesman. He was on the Tonight Show, so he was like everybody's favorite bluesman. Then you got Stevie Ray Vaughan, who dominated, and still I hear students today that's what they want to play is Stevie Ray Vaughan. Well, he's been gone for 30 years, right? So what's going on? Is it still evolving, or are we just looping around on ourselves?
Don't forget Jeff Beck.
Well, Jeff, obviously, yeah.
Jeff Beck is one of the classics, man. I mean, really. I mean, he's a guy that plays better now than he played back when in the day when all this stuff was happening in the 70s. He plays better now than he did back then.
Oh, I agree completely. But as a blues artist, you wouldn't think of him as a blues artist, even though he plays the hell out of blues.
Yeah.
And plays blues. Yeah. Essentially, that's what he does. But anyway.
I'd like to add one thing if I can.
You got
quick. As a drummer, comping. Like, you remember Laundromat Blues by Albert? I'm sure you all.
Oh, yeah.
Love that song.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh yeah, me too, bro. Yeah, he's gonna kill her.
Yeah.
If he's
He's pissed off, man. 'Cause
gonna
he-
be
Don't
down
get so clean, you're going to wash your life away.
Yes, right. Yeah.
That's old Bowser too. Yeah. All
harassing
right, so here, so
political climate.
you know, the comping, all that little shit he plays in between, not the
Yeah.
solo, but just when he's hanging,
Yeah.
and the little change ups and that. The same with like what was that one by Bobby Blue Blank? I don't want no woman.
Yeah.
The flat
Telling
tie.
me how to live my life. Yeah.
Man, and all that little because when I'm playing with a guy and he knows how to comp, you know, on the blues, then it's gonna swing like a dog, man. Guitar player has a lot to do. Everybody thinks it's the drummer. Yeah, it's the bottom line. It is. I mean, we're the responsible ones, but and the bass, of course, but also how a guitar player comps. That's like putting the glue in it or not putting the glue in it, or right seasoning. And sometimes it just hits you right in the heart, man, and the whole thing takes off. You know what I mean? It's like I just wanted to mention that because you know, same with drums. Whenever I do a drum thing, everybody's talking about chops and the soul. But man, what about comping? You don't get to the solo if you can't comp because you won't be on the gig. Remember how Cats used to say? I remember what Cats used to say. There'd be a great guitar player that had chops up the wazoo, but we'd be doing a funk day. You know, we were young. The question would be like, yeah, but can he chank?
Hey, you know,
Chank ain't on the gig.
I got a Maceo. Hey, you know Will Boulware, right? The keyboard player, Will Boulware. You know, he used to play. He was in Tribal Tech before it was Tribal Tech. He was the first guy we played with, and he's an old friend of mine. And he's been playing with Maceo Parker for years.
Okay.
He told me that you know, there was a guitar player that auditioned for the gig, and Maceo Parker said, "Can you do a, you know, like a funky groove in D?" And the guy went, "Yeah." And Maceo goes, "That's awesome. Can you do that for 4 hours?"
Yeah.
Well, if we get high, it's like being in a reggae band, right?
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah, Nathan, were you going to say something there?
Well, I was going to say a couple things, but the Barry White gigs, we used to have to play those tunes like in the studio for 8 hours. You know, you're just like on this one groove all day. You know, you just until it just gets so deep into the. But I was going to say, you know, guys like Robert Cray and Keb Mo, they're keeping the they're keeping the train moving down the track as well. And and you think about everybody here, you know, we're going off of that foundation, but you're architects, and so your house is going to look a little different, and you may just, you know, the angles or whatever. So that's where we are, I think. Now where we have the foundation, but we're taking it to another level, and then that's what excites me to see where it's going to go from here.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's. I mean, I listen to players like Josh, you know, and Kirk, and well, you know, going back to here in L.A., Hollywood Fats, you know, late great, just a phenomenal guitar player that preceded Stevie Ray Vaughan. And then, you know, today you got, you know, Kid Ramos. You've got, like, you know, a whole thing in Southern California, ironically, right? Beach towns and whatnot.
Right.
But just, like, blues, like, left and right, especially in Orange County. It's like, what? You know, but there it is, you know. And
also, I wanted to
a
say,
lot of traditionalists. They're going back and they're dissecting stuff. And then you got, like, you know, a Blind Boy Paxton. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He sounds like he's from 1925 in every respect, and he's a young guy, you know, and can play every instrument and plays it legit, like right down the middle, you know. So there's that whole retro sort of thing, tradition, but then there's everybody who's taken sort of the blues inspiration and sort of dressing it up in different clothes. And I think that's probably the way it's got to go. You know, blues will survive in different forms, and you'll have that traditional thing going on a certain level, but it's always going to be part of every other style of music in the world, without question.
Keith, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't Kev Moe a GIT student?
Sure enough, Kevin Moore was a GIT student.
Unbelievable.
Kev Moe.
You see, I didn't know that because I think he was maybe the year before me, I think.
Yeah, he was early on. He was early on. We didn't teach him a damn thing.
What a badass! He is such a badass,
Straight out of Compton too.
Wow.
Yeah, right.
He was a GIT student.
Yeah,
yeah. Great player. Great.
Yeah.
He's really
Phenomenal.
great everything.
Yeah.
Can I tell you a quick, cute story? A guitar story?
Go for it.
All right. I don't want to gorilla the whole thing, so I'll make this quick. I'm on an Otis Rush gig. This is in the 80s, right?
Uh-huh.
So Otis brings this young kid from Denver who's really a good blues guitar phenomenon. I mean, he just played blues. He doesn't add anything, or it's just he just plays the old traditional, like B.B. King style or Albert, somewhere in there, or. And Otis, I think Otis feels he's going to have a hit here and make some real money with this kid, and the guy's about 18. So Danny Dreyer, who's been on every blues gig there is the musical director. And him and Otis are tight. So you know how the old guys used to say, I remember when I was a kid, the old guy, the guitar player, would be taking a nice solo and a slow blues and just kind of walking, and playing some sweet stuff, and they'd be like, "Take your time, son." That's what that's song of encouragement, right? And everybody said it. I'd hear that all the time, whether you were taking your time or not. It was just like a thing that cats would say, like people ladies like saying, "Yeah," but this was "Take your time, son." So anyway, this kid's playing his ass off. He's playing a great solo. We're all comping slow blues, like Otis. Everybody's just, there's three guitar players now. Danny, the musical director, Otis, the boss, this kid who's coming up being featured on a few tunes. He's playing some nice stuff. And Otis says, with that drawl, D-R-A-W-L, however you say that drawl, he said, "Take your time, son." And the young guy says, "I am taking my time." and so Danny looks at me and just kind of quietly says, "The shit's really changed, hasn't it?"
I didn't feel old until now. Oh, man.
Hey, man, I promised, I got to do this. I promised my friends on Facebook I was going to tell this story, so I'm going to make it very short. But Keith Wyatt's a blues player, and to be a blues player, you have to be somewhat of a jerk and a mean person. So this is Keith, my neighbor. So I'm walking my dogs past his house. I've got this one poor dog that had cancer, and she had to have her front leg amputated. So I got a 3-legger. Then I got another dog who got hit by a car, and her back leg is almost useless. So she's limping. And I walk by Keith's house and I hear him yell down, "Hey, Henderson, if you duct tape those two dogs together, you have one good dog."
Lord!
That's what blues players are like. In their heart, that's what blues players are like.
Well,
That's your blues name, man. 1.5 Dog Henderson.
There you go. There you go.
Hey, before we go to, can I just say, Mike Clark, why have we not played together? And
I don't know. It's a sin and a shame, but let's somehow do that while I'm still here, bro.
Yeah.
Please, because I've played with Herbie Actual Proof, and I'm still trying to count the tune, So maybe you could show me how to count it. But yeah, let's fix that.
Count it. We didn't even
can't count it. Yeah.
know there was the 5/4. We just played it, man. I swear to God, because Herbie telegraphed it to us so good. We learned it in and I'm not a fast learner. I'm not that guy. And we learned it in about 1.5 times, and we had it. And I have no idea why.
Wow.
Yeah. If somebody asked
happens
me to learn a tune that quick, I couldn't do it.
Spirit fills the room. Also, but I was going to say too, Wes Montgomery did a song, and if you haven't heard it, check out "Twisted Blues." And when you hear like blues approach from from his jazz standpoint, it's really something very special when the way he navigates through the changes. But it's like I just thought it was really great to say, okay, we're going to twist the blues up, you know.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Amazing.
And talk
amazing
about an ear player. I mean, yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah, nothing you can say about that.
I'm going to check that out.
Yeah.
Marcus,
Right
how are we
on.
doing?
Oh, I'm just loving this conversation. We could do this all day, but I think we're about that time. We should probably wind things down. Any final thoughts to offer before we head on out today?
Good to see all you guys.
You're going to make me go play.
I think a lot of people are going to go plug in right now and try some of this stuff out. So, yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today.
We'll be taking a 15-minute break right now, and then we'll come back. And
You guys want to play a little bit?
I don't know if the technology is gonna
The latency
be
thing is a bit of a thing,
complimentary.
but
Yeah.
But
well, we're all inspired to let's hope that everybody listening is inspired also to go out and if you're not familiar with all these great records, these great players that we've been talking about here, this is, in my view, and I think you guys would all agree, this is the foundation of a music education, whatever style you like. You know, it doesn't matter. Just one little end note here. You know, Mike and I worked with these Japanese students, and you know, the students in Japan are just as fascinated by this music as us here in America, and even more so, like the Brits back in the 60s. To them, it was exotic. It was like this sound that they had never heard before. It represented like a culture, a style, a way of life, and they just wanted to grab onto it, and he did a really good job of it. You know, and Eric is the living proof of that. You know, he dove into it head first, and the Japanese kids, they're just as much into it. So it's a worldwide thing. It never dies, and we're all fortunate that we're able to play and talk about it and teach it and turn people on to it, hopefully. And so everybody listening today, I hope you enjoyed the conversation, and you know, go away and just put on your Spotify and hit the blues button, you know, and all this stuff will come up. But it's, this is the foundation of music in the world today.
absolutely.
Fellas, it's been my honor and pleasure indeed to have all you guys come here and join us for this conversation. It's fantastic. I hope we get to do it again at some point, and otherwise see you guys out on the road, if there is still a road.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Thanks, Keith. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Oh,
Let's get back out on the road. Hope it opens up here sooner than later.
No kidding.
And next time, if any of you are in Napa, be sure to swing by the studio.
Absolutely.
I got my Little Milton records, man. As soon as we get off this call and have a glass of wine, that's
Woo!
Oh,
Little Milltown. Yeah.
crying.
All right then.
Thanks
you.
everybody for joining us, and for everybody that's tuned in today, the little scroll's been going by, but we have a podcast out with more history on exploring blues styles with Keith that we just launched today on ArtistWorks. There's a link in the feed there, so be sure to check that out if you enjoy this topic, and we'll see you all on the next broadcast. Thanks everybody.
Woo!